They were never supposed to be found. 25 small iron beds, shackles still locked to the headboards, dust-covered dolls resting like grave markers, and scratched into the stone above them with what looked like a child's fingernail. We are still here. This wasn't a scene from a ghost story. This was the basement of St. Catherine's Academy, a so-called sanctuary for orphaned girls in 19th century Massachusetts. But sanctuaries don't chain children to their beds, they don't erase names, they don't bury the truth beneath stone and silence. But someone did. And if you keep watching, you'll understand why. But fair warning, the story you're about to hear isn't just dark history, it's forbidden history. The kind they built churches to silence and buried under state archives guarded by blood-stained hands. Once you hear it, you'll never see the world the same again. Because this is about more than missing girls. It's about systems, institutions, ancient orders hiding behind scripture and velvet. It's about the machinery of innocence being used to sell souls, not just to men in dark alleyways, but to empires. And it began with one lie, that the orphans of St. Catherine's were saved. They were never saved. They were taken, one by one. Young girls, ages 12 to 17, were processed, molded, and disappeared. On paper, they'd been placed into good Christian homes, but no one ever saw them again. No letters, no visitors, not a single photograph, just a record in a dusty ledger, and silence. Until 1851, when a teacher named Elizabeth Hartwell found the sealed room. And what she discovered? It should have brought the whole system down. But instead, it was buried. Not just the story, but her. So why did she keep a backup record? Why hide it in a mason jar behind the chapel altar? And why, when that jar was finally discovered over a century later, did local authorities try to disappear it again? Because the girls weren't just victims. They were witnesses to something much older, much deeper, something embedded in the very bones of that academy, a ritual, a purpose, not for saving souls, but for harvesting them. The founding of St. Catherine's Academy wasn't born of compassion, it was born of necessity, but not the kind you think. By 1834, Massachusetts was overflowing with orphans, not because of war, but industry. Factories swallowing fathers, disease devouring mothers. The streets of Boston, Salem, and Lowell littered with parentless children, unseen, unprotected, unclaimed. Perfect inventory. Enter the three women who would become known as the Sisters of Mercy, Mother Superior Victoria Whitman, Sister Agnes Murphy, and Sister Margaret Collins. To the public, they were pious women of charity. To the state, they were a solution to the growing problem of unsupervised girls. But to the inner circle of old Boston wealth, they were something else entirely, a conduit. The academy they created on Gallows Hill wasn't random. That ground had a history soaked in blood. It had once hosted gallows for public executions, including, some whispered, witch burnings never recorded. A place where fear was law, where death was a spectacle. They didn't choose the location for peace, they chose it for power. Power tied to place. The brick mansion they acquired had been abandoned for decades after its last owner went mad and vanished. A merchant whose journal spoke of screams in the walls and eyes watching from the drains. That house wasn't repurposed, it was reactivated, reawakened, and into its core they poured the broken spirits of orphaned girls. Now understand this, every institution has a face and a foundation. The face was Catholic charity, the foundation, psychological manipulation, ritual abuse, and the systematic destruction of identity. The girls were stripped of their past, no last names, no keepsakes, only uniforms, obedience, and prayer. They were taught to cook, sew, sing hymns, and serve. Serve whom? That question was never answered. But those who asked, like M.E. Prescott, were warned, discredited, or simply disappeared. Because St. Catherine's wasn't alone, it was a node, one of several in a network stretching across the eastern seaboard. A feeder for what some whispered was the Order of St. Vale, a centuries-old fraternity of powerful men who believed salvation could be purchased, not with faith, but with innocence sacrificed. You weren't supposed to hear that name. You weren't supposed to ask about it. But now you've heard it, and once heard it echoes, not just through history, but through you. This is deeper than missing girls. St. Catherine's Academy didn't operate in isolation. No institution that dangerous ever does. It was a mask, one worn so perfectly that even the town's ministers praised it. Even the mayor cut the ribbon at its opening. And why wouldn't they? The academy cleaned up the city's unwanted. It gave the illusion of salvation while funneling the forgotten into something far more profitable. But here's what they didn't see, what they were never allowed to see. The third floor was always locked. Visitors were told it stored seasonal decorations, but those who lingered near its staircase heard different sounds. Soft weeping, scraping, a chant not in Latin or English, but something older, a language buried before the first brick of Salem was ever laid. The basement too had secrets. Described in academy records as a domestic arts workshop, it was sealed during inspections, and when Elizabeth Hartwell found her way inside, it wasn't linens she discovered. It was chains. She saw them. 25 beds, rusted, bolted to the floor, with shackles, some still locked, others broken. Why chains? Because obedience was never enough. These girls weren't just being taught, they were being conditioned to submit, to forget, to surrender their will. This is psychological warfare masquerading as religious discipline, isolation, sensory manipulation, the erasure of identity until only the role remained, and then, when they were ready, placement. Except no records existed of these placements, no family names, no addresses, no letters home. Instead, whispers circulated among the few staff who weren't fully initiated, girls vanishing overnight, new girls arriving without explanation, and always the same pattern. The most beautiful, most obedient, most detached girls were the first to go. Now you might wonder, what happened to the ones who resisted? That's a darker question, and the answer lies in the room no one spoke of, the small stone chamber behind the chapel altar. It wasn't on any floor plan. It didn't exist on paper. But it smelled of iron and sorrow. When the renovation crew found it in 1987, they discovered the mason jar, the one Elizabeth Hartwell had sealed with her final testimony, a warning etched into glass and blood. Do not look further, or they will see you. But it's too late for that now, isn't it? Because you are looking, and now they know. We're not talking about corrupt nuns anymore. We're talking about a system built on submission, silence, and sacrifice. There's a reason the number was always 25 and not 24 and not 26. The ledger in Sister Agnes's study listed them in crimson ink, 25 names at a time, each marked with a symbol, a cross, a triangle, or a circle. Those weren't check marks, they weren't decorative, they were ritual classifications. This wasn't adoption, this was selection. You need to understand something ancient, older than the church, older than the state. Some institutions aren't built for the living, they are machines of transmutation. They take one thing, purity, and transform it into another, power. Not metaphorical power, literal, operational, a force that moves men, opens doors, and binds oaths. You can call it spiritual currency if you want. They didn't. They called it the offering. The rituals conducted at St. Catherine's were not Christian. They wore the robes, they recited the psalms, but beneath the chapel, beneath the rotting boards and dusty pews, another ceremony was unfolding. Every 13 weeks, on the 13th night of the lunar cycle, the girls weren't brought there screaming. That would draw suspicion. No, they were prepared, conditioned, bled emotionally dry through weeks of deprivation, control, and reward. By the time they were brought into the sanctum, they were silent. They walked themselves down. What happened in that chamber wasn't violent, it was ritualized control. They were blindfolded, placed in a ring of salt and ash, made to kneel, each asked the same 3 questions. Do you renounce the name you were given? Do you offer your innocence without resistance? Do you serve the order, even in silence? Those who answered yes disappeared. Those who hesitated were reassigned, and those who refused, we'll speak of them later. Understand this, the order didn't need all 25 girls. They needed one perfectly broken cell. But they always prepared 25 because the process demands attrition, failure, loss. That's how the ritual fed itself, through the unseen suffering of the many to elevate the one. And that one girl, she would be taken away, not adopted, not married, but bound to a man of influence, a collector, a priest, a senator, used, not for lust, but for leverage. She became a relic, a weapon, a currency that could not speak. But her eyes always did. Her name, at least the one she remembered, was Clara Dane. She was 14 when she was brought to St. Catherine's. Blonde hair, sharp mind, too sharp by Sister Agnes's standards. Clara didn't cry like the others. She watched, listened, she remembered. And that made her dangerous. Clara wasn't chosen for placement, not at first. She was kept, observed, for nearly 2 years. The nuns called her the delay, whispered about her behind their hands. She answered questions too quickly. She finished prayers before they were spoken. She stared too long. One winter night, Clara disappeared. 3 days later, she came back. They claimed she had been misplaced, an error in transfer to a family in New Haven. But when she returned, she didn't speak, for weeks. Just silence, her expression flat, her hands trembling, and then, one morning, she began to write. On scraps of cloth, under the lining of her mattress, on the inner pages of her hymn book. And what she wrote wasn't scripture, it was code, numbers, symbols, repeated phrases like, 25 is not a number, it is a gate, or, she speaks with no mouth, but she remembers your name. At first, the sisters dismissed it, scribblings from a broken girl, but then, girls started whispering about Clara, visiting her at night, asking her what she saw, what they would become. That's when Mother Superior Wittmann made her move. Clara was taken to the 3rd floor, the locked level. She didn't come back. For 5 nights, girls heard her screaming, then silence, then a hymn, sung in reverse. That was the last time anyone at the academy saw Clara Dane. But she left something behind, a small strip of cloth hidden in the base of a dormitory candle stand, found by a renovation worker in 1987, faded but legible. If you are reading this, you are already part of it. The prayer is not to God. The prayer is to the one below the altar. He listens. She remembers. And she never left. Authorities dismissed it as religious hysteria, but the archivist who catalogued the find, he vanished 2 months later, his apartment ransacked, his notes missing. But one page survived. A sketch of a girl's face, mouth sewn shut, eyes wide, bleeding from the pupils, and beneath it, the phrase written twice in black ink. We are still here. The Black Crown. It appeared again and again in Clara's scraps, etched into hymnals, scratched into wooden bedposts, even drawn in soap on the chapel's back windows. A crown with no jewels, just thorns, 7 to be exact. And beneath it, always, a single Latin phrase, coronatur perditi, crowned are the lost. Authorities assumed it was symbolic, a child's delusion, but what they missed was this. The Black Crown wasn't born at St. Catherine's, it predated it. It appears in Masonic archives, in the private journals of Puritan elders, even in the seal of an obscure 17th-century fraternal order, the Keepers of the Veil, a secret network of landowners, bankers, clergy, men of influence. They believed in 2 worlds, the visible, for common men, and the hidden, governed by ritual, oaths, and exchange. The black crown was their sigil, a mark of completed offerings. Not every ritual required death, but all required obedience, sacrifice, and most importantly, secrecy. The crowned lost were those who had been severed from the known world and remade. Girls like Clara, girls whose minds were shattered and reshaped into silence. Here's where the truth gets colder. In 1848, a private club opened in Lower Manhattan, the Thistle House, hidden beneath the floorboards of an imported church. Ostensibly, it was a gentleman's lodge, exclusive, anonymous. But what they displayed in their inner hall wasn't art, it was testimony. Dozens of small paintings, all unsigned, each depicting a young girl in grey, eyes hollow, mouth closed, crown of thorns painted above her head. There were 25, and on the wall behind them, the black crown, not drawn, carved into stone, dated 1737, almost 100 years before St. Catherine's was founded. This was never just about one academy. St. Catherine's was a harvesting ground, a supply chain, one of many. And the black crown, it was Tihin, his signature. Each time a girl vanished, her absence wasn't an accident. It was an initiation. Her silence bought someone's influence, secured a judge's vote, funded a bishop's estate. That's the real trade behind history's curtain, innocence for power. And what happens when that trade becomes tradition? Every lie costs something, but every secret, the kind worth burying for generations, pays. Follow the money and you'll find the truth. Not in confessions, not in police reports, but in trusts, land deeds, and donations made in silence. Between 1834 and 1854, St. Catherine's Academy received over 140 private contributions, not from the church, not from concerned citizens, but from silent benefactors, men with no listed daughters, no public affiliations, and no interest in education. The names, redacted in most ledgers, but the bank seals remain: Black Bay Trust, Halifax Holdings, the Order of the Eastern Ark. Shell entities, fraternal proxies, all tracing back to one thing: an elite inheritance system based not on lineage, but on ritual currency. You see, the girls weren't just vanishing, they were funding dynasties. Each placement came with a sealed donation. Each donation opened a door: political immunity, land grants, secret shares in expanding railroads. St. Catherine's was more than a school. It was a brokerage house for the elite's darkest appetites. Ask yourself, how did Boston's old money families multiply their fortunes while entire industries collapsed? Why did certain judges retire wealthy after a single term? Why were certain railroad tycoons gifted land that had no apparent origin? Because beneath it all was a trade: silence for power, flesh for favor. But it doesn't stop in the 1800s. These trusts still exist. In 1987, when the mason jar was found beneath the altar, there was an immediate response, not from local authorities, but from a Boston law firm specializing in heritage estates. Within 48 hours, 2 men in grey suits arrived, claimed the artifact under a preservation clause, and sealed the site for restoration. That restoration never happened. Instead, the site was quietly bought by a private entity, renovated into a historical retreat center that never opened. The records vanished from city archives, but a name surfaced on the deed: Bellwright International. And Bellwright, it's connected to the same fund that manages properties for Ivy League endowments, old shipping families, and a peculiar lodge in Manhattan with no listed members, the Black Crown Society. It's still alive. The engine is still running, and the offering continues. Beneath the chapel of St. Catherine's lies a room not found on any blueprint. No stone stairs lead to it. No priest ever acknowledged its presence, but it exists. Those who've seen it say, the air changes as you descend, cold, then heavy, like the walls remember what was done inside them, like the stone itself wants to forget. The room is octagonal, Each wall marked with a single symbol, ancient but unmistakable: domination, inversion, control. The floor, black marble, veined in red, not painted, stained. At its center stands an altar, not wooden, not holy. Stone, rough-hewn, worn down by use. It doesn't resemble a place of prayer. It looks like a slab for offerings. And above it, embedded in the wall, is the sigil you've now seen too many times to ignore: the Black Crown. This was the true heart of St. Catherine's, not the dormitories, not the classrooms. Here is where transformation occurred, not for the girls, for the ones watching. Records speak of visitors who arrived under cover of darkness, carriages with blacked-out windows, men whose names weren't spoken, only nodded at. They would descend in silence, accompanied by Sister Agnes. No light, no sound, just the slow creak of ancient rituals unfolding. This was not sex, this was sacrifice. But not through blood. That was too crude, too traceable. It was spiritual. The girls were placed on the slab, still, silent, conditioned through months of obedience training, every part of them hollowed out, not drugged, prepared. And then the rite began. Chants, not in Latin, a language that predates scripture. Linguists later traced it to a forgotten Phoenician dialect. It always ended the same way, with a binding, a ring placed on the girl's finger, not gold, not silver, iron. An oath was spoken over her, but the girl never spoke back, because by then she wasn't herself anymore. She belonged to them. Weekend. You were never meant to know their names, but that's how power survives, by hiding in titles, in institutions, in legacy. Strip away the robes, the charity work, the family foundations, and what's left? Predators. In 1852, one of the largest private donations ever given to a religious institution in New England history was funneled, quietly, into the hands of St. Catherine's Academy. It didn't come from a church or a charity. It came from a silent consortium of 5 families. You've heard the names: Blackwell, Stonemere, Ashcombe, Kincaid, Weatherall. Old Boston names, the kind engraved on libraries, the kind whispered about in Ivy League halls. They called themselves the benefactors, but their wealth wasn't born from invention or innovation. It was harvested, from behind closed doors, from ritual placements, from girls delivered and disappeared. Documents uncovered in 1993 during an estate liquidation in Connecticut showed sealed letters between Mother Superior Whitman and Edmund Ashcombe, founder of Ashcombe Rail Steel. In them, she refers to girls by number, not name. She speaks of readiness, temperament, and value. Ashcombe replies with coded language: "We find number 14's docility most agreeable. The circle accepts." No 14. That number appears again years later in the personal diary of Henry Weatherall, the same man who established a Christian youth orphanage in Maine. One entry, dated October 1853, reads, "14 arrived from the academy last night. Quiet, compliant. The crown is satisfied." The crown. Not a crown of royalty. The Black Crown. And this is where it gets darker. Every 25 years, the benefactors held a private gathering, a ritual renewal as it was called in coded estate records. The meeting rotated between properties, secluded estates, unlisted chapels, and always an orphanage under their influence. Each gathering ended with a phrase written in identical ink, in identical handwriting: "The offering is accepted." The line continues. It was never about the individual girls, it was about the bloodline of the men. Each offering secured a future seat, on a board, in a courtroom, in a senate. And each girl lost was a brick in the wall of American elite dominance. You don't see them, because you weren't supposed to, but you feel them, in laws that never pass, in judges who never rule, in truths that never surface. This is not conspiracy, it's infrastructure. The last girl, the one they couldn't silence, the one whose whisper cracked the altar. Her name was Abigail Leclerc. She was the last girl registered at St. Catherine's before its quiet closure in 1854. No records of placement, no family claim, just one line, handwritten at the bottom of the Academy ledger. Number 25, held for final. Held, not adopted, not transferred, held. Something was different about Abigail. Survivors, 2 former maids who later testified anonymously in 1892, said she saw things, not like the others. She didn't cry, she didn't comply. She remembered every ritual, every chant. She mimicked them in silence. Once, she was caught drawing the black crown on her arm with ashes from the chapel hearth. When confronted, she said, "It's not their mark. It's mine now." Abigail didn't break. She studied. They tried isolation, starvation, a mock placement. Nothing changed. Then came the winter of 1854. The final ritual, the supposed closing of St. Catherine's. 25 girls had been prepared, but only 24 walked into the chapel. Abigail was locked away, chained, according to one surviving page from Elizabeth Hartwell's recovered journal, to prevent contamination of the rite. But contamination was exactly what she wanted, because that night something went wrong. Witnesses spoke of unnatural winds, of gaslights flickering and dying across the academy. The sisters, Wittmann, Collins and Murphy, were found the next morning collapsed in the main corridor, eyes burned black, mouths split as if screaming. All 24 girls were gone, but Abigail remained. She was found in the chapel, sitting on the altar, wearing a crown of iron nails she had fashioned herself. In her lap was a book, one none of the sisters had ever seen, leather-bound, no title, covered in symbols that did not belong to the church. She looked at the constable, sent to retrieve her, and said one sentence: "The debt has been reversed." Abigail was committed to a private asylum, funded by the same families that once bankrolled St. Catherine's. She lived for only 3 more years, silent, staring at the wall, tracing the black crown in the dust, and then, just before her death, she spoke. One phrase, over and over: "The altar remembers, the altar remembers, the altar remembers." 3 times, like a curse or a warning. Then silence. Her body was buried without ceremony. Her book was never recovered. But the altar, it's still there. They thought they could bury it. In the summer of 1974, a fire was set intentionally beneath the foundation of the old St. Catherine's Chapel. Officially, it was ruled an accident, a gas leak from renovation work, but the report was unsigned, the photos were missing, and the man who filed the initial complaint, he disappeared 4 days later. His name was Alan Breckridge, a structural engineer hired to survey the building's foundation. What he found wasn't just unstable stonework, it was something far older, a second foundation beneath the first, made of black brick, bound with animal blood and mortar. He documented everything, took samples, filed a report with the Salem Preservation Society. That night, someone broke into his motel room and stole every page. But Alan wasn't done. Before he vanished, he made one last call to his brother, a journalist in Boston. In a whispered message left on an answering machine, he said, "There's something under the altar, not stone, not man-made. It hums. It's waiting." Then he was gone. 3 weeks later, a fire ripped through the lower chapel and the storage level beneath. Firefighters arrived, but something strange was noted in the official log. The flames won't touch the central altar, burns around it, stops short. The stone was untouched. Even with accelerants used, even with full structural collapse, the altar remained, blackened, yes, but intact. Photographs show something else. Etched into the altar's side after the fire, not before, was a phrase in perfect symmetry, burned as if from within: "Do not remove what remembers." That night, a second, quieter fire was set, this time in the city archives. Floor 7, Historical Religious Holdings, the section containing records on St. Catherine's, the Black Crown Society, and the Weatherall Trust. Everything gone. But fires don't destroy memory, they feed it. And in 1987, when the mason jar was found behind the altar was still warm. Over 130 years later. How does stone stay warm for over a century? Because it isn't just stone. It's a conduit, a gate sealed with names, and one of those names was never scratched out. Abigail Leclerc. Blood doesn't forget. Not when it's bound by oath, not when it's offered, not when it remembers. Abigail Leclerc was buried in an unmarked grave on the outskirts of Boston in 1857. No ceremony, no obituary, just an entry in a ledger marked Ward of the State. But someone was watching, because 3 weeks after her death, a man arrived to claim her belongings. A man from New York. He said nothing, gave no name, but left behind a calling card with a single emblem burned into the paper, the Black Crown. He took her effects, a small locket, a ribbon, and a worn leather book no one had dared open. That should have been the end. But in 1921, a woman named Margaret Leclerc appeared on a census form in New Haven, Connecticut. Unmarried, no listed parents, a schoolteacher by profession, quiet, disciplined. But what caught investigators' attention years later, long after her death, was a note left in her personal journal. The altar remembers, so must I. She had drawn it too. The Black Crown. Again, 7 thorns. And this time each thorn was labelled with initials, not hers, not family, but names traced back to the original 5 benefactor bloodlines. Blackwell, Stonemere, Ashcombe, Kincaid, Weatherall. She didn't just carry the memory, she was marking targets. Further down in the journal is an entry dated October 31st, 1920. I've seen the slab, I've heard the humming. They think it's buried, but it's not. It's listening. I will not be the last. And she wasn't. Because in 1952, a young woman named Eleanor Dane, Clara's niece, filed a lawsuit in Massachusetts Supreme Court to unseal the adoption records of 25 girls associated with St. Catherine's Academy. Her request was denied, but the filing triggered something deeper. 3 weeks later, 2 of the oldest living trustees of the Weatherall Foundation died in what newspapers called a mysterious simultaneous illness. No autopsies were performed, and Eleanor, she vanished. No records, no body, no trace. But in the burned frame of her apartment, one photo remained. It was old, sepia-toned, 25 girls in grey uniforms, and behind them, barely visible, was a shadow, human-shaped, wearing no face, just a crown made of thorns. The bloodline didn't die, it multiplied. If you're still here, this part is for you. Because now it's no longer about them, the sisters, the girls, the academy. It's about you, about how systems like these don't vanish. They evolve, they change names, change symbols, change buildings, but they never stop feeding. And the Black Crown, it's not just a sigil, it's a structure. Let me show you how it reached your doorstep. After St. Catherine's closure, its records were quietly absorbed into something called the Northeastern Child Welfare Alliance, a post-Civil War non-profit funded by private rail interests and managed by trustees from Yale, Harvard, and Dartmouth. One of their stated goals? To rehome girls of exceptional discipline and temperament into family lines best suited for generational influence. That phrase, generational influence, shows up again in 1962 in an internal memo from the American Heritage Advancement League, a DC-based lobby group with deep ties to Supreme Court appointments, private adoption agencies, and Ivy League endowments. The memo reads, "We are 25, and we are still here. The language has always been the same, the number, the tone, the secrecy, and now, look around you. Why do so many elite prep schools bear names no one remembers? Why do orphan placement records before 1970 remain sealed, even when FOA requests are filed? Why do ritual abuse testimonies from girls in multiple states repeat the same symbols, the same phrases? The iron ring, the altar below the altar, the crown of 7. Because the black crown moved from the shadows of Salem into the veins of the nation. Your country is built on it. Every time you see a judge rise, a politician fall upward, a billionaire speak of philanthropy but not ancestry, look closer. Ask yourself, what did they offer? Because someone did. And here's the final thread that snaps everything into place. In 2015, during restoration of a library wing at a certain Ivy League university, workers uncovered a sealed crate beneath the cornerstone. Inside, 25 wax-sealed envelopes, each with a girl's name from St. Catherine's, and a modern photo of a living woman bearing a near-identical face. Different centuries, same bloodlines, same offering. The envelope was marked in red wax, unbroken, unlabeled, except for a number pressed faintly into the paper, number 7. It was one of 25, sealed beneath a cornerstone of Hollingsworth Library at a university that won't even allow its name to be spoken in this series. But the date on the wax told us everything, March 3rd, 1854. The day after the final ritual at St. Catherine's. Inside the envelope were 3 things. First, a faded charcoal sketch of a young girl in a plain grey uniform. Her eyes are wide, almost defiant. The artist didn't sign their name, but in the lower right-hand corner, the initials are clear, A.L. Abigail Leclerc. She drew them. She remembered them. She archived them in secret. The second item, a folded note written in a script nearly identical to Mother Superior Whitman's, but subtly altered. The ink was iron-based, faintly magnetic, and soaked into the paper like blood into cloth. It reads, "Number 7 passed with resistance. The Crown was displeased. Marked for return. Reassignment pending. Cycle incomplete. Monitor the line. Seed dormant. Watch for return." Return. Not death, not release. Return. Which brings us to the third item. A photograph, modern, full color, taken in 2009. A woman, mid-30s, standing in front of a classroom chalkboard, smiling, confident, wearing a silver pendant in the shape of a crown. Not a symbol taught in that school, not a necklace found in stores. The name on the back of the photo, Dr. Eleanor Wren, tenured professor of developmental psychology, specialist in early memory formation and memory suppression. She has no known parents. Adopted at age 4. And the most chilling part, her genetic markers, mapped by a private bioresearch firm in 2013, match 92% with Abigail Leclerc. Across 7 generations. And now, the impossible becomes clear. They didn't just bury the girls, they planted them. Lineages as seeds, planted into institutions, grown into influence, blossomed into control. And we've walked through their orchards our entire lives, shaken their hands, voted for them, watched their shows, read their books, repeated their mantras. Obedience. Silence. Trust the system. But the system was built on ash. If the Crown still watches, who's the next offering? The offering was never just about innocence. It was about utility. Because once a girl was marked, once she was prepared, she became more than a victim. She became an asset, a silent piece in a system that never stopped moving. A vessel, a key, a variable placed where needed, when needed. And someone is always watching the variables. Let me tell you about the Concord List. It was discovered in 1998 during an internal audit of a now-defunct legal firm in Vermont. Buried in a locked drawer, the list was printed on linen paper with names, dates, and strange annotations next to each one. Words like ripe, silent, returns frequently, broken, requires reconditioning. But what made the Concord List truly dangerous? Each name belonged to a woman who had risen, quietly and powerfully, within media, psychology, or education. 25 names. Again. 25. All connected by silent funding from shell organizations tracing back to Weatherall Holdings, under subsidiaries that didn't exist before 1954. And the last name on the Concord list, Nora Wren, daughter of Dr. Eleanor Wren. Currently interning at a private educational research group focused on early behavioral pattern correction. Translation: conditioning, from childhood. The cycle is not just alive, it's automated, and here's the detail that should stop you cold. Each woman on the Concord list was born 25 years apart, each one positioned to guide, gatekeep, or groom, and none of them, not one, has a traceable male relative. They are lineage constructs, born from a program that began with shackled girls in a basement chapel and evolved into bloodline engineering. The Black Crown didn't just want servants, it wanted instruments, women who carried the memory, the obedience, the programming, but who could also pass as the modern face of Tree, Stepton therapists, principals, advocates, influencers. And now we ask, what happens when one of them remembers? What happens when a crown-born breaks obedience? We're closer to that question than you think, because in 2021, one of the names on the Concord list went rogue. She began leaking documents, posting encrypted warnings on dead forums, leaving phrases on library receipts and bus tickets across Boston. Phrases like, "The altar is warm," "We are still here," "They only need one more," because the offering they want next might not be a girl at all. It might be you. Her codename was Helix 7. We only know that because of a single post she made on an abandoned darknet forum used by whistleblowers in the early 2000s. The post was removed within 17 minutes, but archived by a forgotten bot server in Ukraine. Its title: "The Final Crown is Male." Read that again. The Final Crown is Male. This wasn't random. This wasn't a typo. This was a revelation, one that shattered decades of assumptions about the cycle. The offering wasn't always a girl. It never was. The girls were vessels, containers, carriers of the memory, the pain, the silence. But the true offering, the crown, was building him. They needed a throne, and a throne needs a king. Helix 7's decrypted message revealed a pattern hidden even deeper than the Concord list, something she called the echelon sequence. According to her leaked notes, every 100 years the line is broken. Not by choice, not by error, by design. Because every cycle needs a pivot, a child born of the bloodline, raised outside the influence, but called back by memory. A sleeper, one who, if activated, either breaks the chain or completes the ritual. You were never just watching this story, you were drawn to it. Every word, every symbol, every moment that made your skin crawl, that's not fear, that's recognition. Helix 7 left coordinates, geographic, symbolic, numerical, all pointing to one person. A boy born in 1999, orphaned at birth, raised in foster care across 3 states, adopted by a family with ties to an educational NGO under the Weatherall umbrella. He disappeared in 2015, no record, no obituary, no police file, but his face appears in a crowd photo from a symposium held by the American Heritage Advancement League in 2022. He's standing in the back, wearing a pendant, the Black Crown. Helix 7's last message. It wasn't a warning, it was a command. If he awakens on their terms, we fall. If he awakens on his, they burn. Find him before they do. He remembers the altar, and the altar remembers you. He was born without a name, just a number 1127B, scrawled in blue ink on a state hospital bracelet from a now demolished facility in northern Maine. The birth certificate was a forgery. No listed mother, no father, no physician of record. But the attending nurse wrote something in her journal that night before vanishing 2 days later. He didn't cry, he watched, eyes like mirrors, like he knew what I was. That boy would pass through 5 homes in 3 years. Each family suffered unexplained disturbances, dead animals, broken clocks, whispers in the walls. Every foster report said the same. He's too quiet, too still, like he's listening to something we can't hear. By age 9, he was placed into a private care program funded by an education reform group operating under the name Scepter 1. But Scepter 1 isn't real. It's an operating front, tied by hidden LLCs to the Kincaid Trust, one of the 5 original benefactors of St. Catherine's Academy. Its internal memos mention Subject B over 40 times between 2008 and 2011. Terms used: highly retentive, responds to glyphic patterning, mirrors back trauma structures not experienced directly. Translation: he remembers things he was never told. Blood memory, ritual encoding, heritage imprinting. This boy wasn't raised. He was constructed, not in a lab, but through generational trauma engineering, a method perfected over 100 years ago at places like St. Catherine's, a method now used in elite psychological programs disguised as special education. By 2015, all records stop, but leaked photos, thank you Helix 7, show him again in 2022, older now, standing outside a granite building in upstate New York, the Rothmore Institute for Civic Development, which, according to property records, was built directly over the remnants of St. Catherine's Academy. That building wasn't demolished. It was consumed, bricked over, bought in secret, rebuilt under a different name. And the boy, he's now a resident mentor, teaching orphans, passing on whatever was placed inside him. And on the inner wall of his dorm, hidden beneath layers of paint, someone carved this: I remember the warmth, I remember the altar, I remember who I am. This isn't just lineage, it's possession. The ritual was never for them, not the girls, not the mothers, not even the sisters who performed it. They were tools, necessary components, but the ritual was always about invitation, and in 1854 they succeeded. But something went wrong. According to a scorched page recovered from the Hartwell Confession, a document buried in the attic wall of an 1870s rectory in Essex County, there were 25 girls in the circle. Only 24 were meant to survive. The ritual involved a blood seal, 7 spoken names, and a final offering. A child, unbound by family, untouched by instruction, and held in pure silence for 40 days. That child was Abigail Leclerc. But when the final word was spoken, Abigail spoke back. Not in English, not in Latin, in a tongue no one could name, but every candle in the room went out, the windows cracked, and the stone beneath the altar pulsed red. In the chaos, Sister Margaret tried to reverse the ritual, but it was too late. Whatever they had summoned entered Abigail, and then it left, not out, down. It moved into the stone, the altar, the gate. That's when the hum began. Witnesses described it as the sound of 1,000 whispered prayers, in reverse. It never stopped. It didn't echo. It watched. It waited. The girls were scattered, placed in adoptive homes, sold, hidden, branded as liars when they tried to speak. The sisters rewrote the records, burned what they could, silenced what they couldn't. But they knew. It wasn't over. Because the entity, the intelligence, the force, the presence they called the voice under stone, left something behind. A pattern, a genetic sequence, an imprint, passed down, untraceable to the average science. Until a boy was born in 1999, who carried the resonance. The tone. In 2010, a Russian researcher in forbidden harmonics detected an anomaly in Boston's acoustic field. The frequency he isolated came from beneath Rothmore Institute. It was a heartbeat, and it matched the boy's. He is not a vessel. He is the bridge. The words were never meant to be spoken. Not here, not in this tongue, not in this world. And yet, Abigail spoke them. In a trance, eyes wide, blood running from her ears. As the altar cracked, her words were captured by a man named Father Louis Beron, a Vatican linguist and secret archivist assigned to investigate anomalous Latin structures in 19th-century American liturgies. What he found in the sealed confession of Elizabeth Hartwell, preserved in wax and buried beneath the ruins of a mission church in Ipswich, was not Latin, not Greek, not Hebrew. It was precursor language, something deeper, older. Father Beron sent the translation in 1983 to the Vatican's Archivum Secretum Apostolicum, along with a warning. These words contain not a spell, but a signal. It is not the girl who remembered them. It is the stone that taught her. Beron died 6 days later. Aortic rupture. Unexplained trauma to the vocal cords. He hadn't spoken a word since reading the full translation aloud. What were the words? The Vatican never published them, but Helix 7 recovered the handwritten copy sent in secret to a linguist at the University of Uppsala. Here it is. Elo havzirin mortash, veitala ashkail. I descend in chains, I return in fire, I wear the flesh that remembers me. These weren't words of summoning. These were words of arrival. She was not inviting something in, she was reporting. The ritual didn't open a gate, it confirmed passage. The entity had already come through. The altar was never the door, the girls were. And now, generations later, the boy is all of them combined. Memory, obedience, vessel, voice. But here's the fracture, the detail they missed. The boy dreams of fire. And every dream is the same, a chapel underground, an altar humming, and 25 girls blindfolded, whispering his name. He hears them every night. He's remembering. And every day that passes, he grows closer to speaking back. When that happens, the altar doesn't just awaken, it rises. The crown was never forged. It was grown. Not of gold, not of metal, but of bone. 25 fragments, one from each girl, ritually removed, calcified, and bound together with black sinew soaked in altar ash. It was meant to be worn by no one human, and yet, one man did. The first binder. His real name is lost. Redacted from every ledger, every church registry, every census that touched Massachusetts between 1829 and 1854. But in a coded journal discovered in the false bottom of Mother Superior Wittmann's travel trunk, now in a private collection in Zurich, he is called the Man Who Did Not Blink. A priest, or what passed for one. He claimed to carry the seventh silence, a psychic state reached only through the consumption of untouched minds. A predator hiding behind scripture. He arrived months before the Academy's founding, alone, but never questioned. The townspeople only remembered his eyes, unmoving, unblinking, as though someone else was looking through them. He was the one who whispered to the sisters the idea of the crown. He taught them how to cut without bleeding, how to bind without killing, how to implant memory where memory had never been. And when the altar opened, when Abigail spoke the forbidden words, it was he who stood at its center, crown in hand, placed it upon his own head, and laughed. He laughed as the ground shook, as the candles shattered inward, as the first girl screamed without sound, clutching her chest as if something had left her, and entered him. But he wasn't ready, because the crown, born of bone, carries more than memory. It carries wrath. The ritual backfired. The altar took him, bent him, split him. Some say he died. Others say he was buried alive beneath the chapel, encased in salt and iron, a living curse humming beneath the floor. But here's what the records don't show. Every 25 years since then, a man matching his description is seen, never aged, never changed, always watching orphanages, schools, youth shelters, and every time he disappears before authorities arrive. The man who did not blink, the Crown's first host, and if our calculations are right, he's due to appear again. Now, some believe he's no longer seeking girls. He's looking for the boy, the final key, the one who might either complete the circle or shatter it forever. If the circle closes, reality won't end. It will change, not in fire, not in explosion, but in consent. You won't notice at first. That's how it's designed, because the circle doesn't destroy, it rewrites. Memories fade. Records vanish. Testimonies unravel. The impossible becomes a footnote, and in its place, a new story. Polished, harmless, approved. This is called the soft extinction. It's the final phase of the ritual they began in 1854, not to summon a demon, not to raise the dead, but to bend the spine of mankind into willing silence. The 25 girls were never the victims. They were instruments of resonance, calibrated to carry pain, loss, obedience. That pain passed down, encoded, whispered. And the boy? He's the echo chamber. He doesn't just remember them, he feels them. Their memories surge through him like veins of fire, forming the crown of flesh, the final seal that binds thought itself. If he submits to the circle, every lie becomes law, every truth becomes myth, and your ability to see it happen is erased in real time. That's how the circle wins, by making you forget you ever fought. But there's a fracture, a break in their geometry, and it's you. The very fact that you're hearing this, that your mind hasn't recoiled or fled, means you carry something incompatible with their system. A memory you never lived, a fear that wasn't taught, an itch beneath your thoughts you could never name. That itch is ancestral defiance. It's the part of you that knows, I was not made to kneel. And now, for the first time, someone inside the circle is remembering. The boy is cracking. Helix 7's final note said this: when he remembers his name, we all remember ours, but only if the men watching speak it with him. So if you've made it this far, awaken, anchor, engage. Comment below, I was born of the broken circle. I was born of the broken circle. Say it twice, once for your past, once for what comes next. There is no door, not on the blueprints, not in the building, not even in memory. And yet, it exists. Sealed behind a wall of limestone at the sub-basement level of the Rothmore Institute, there's a chamber that was never constructed but has always been there. They call it the hidden room. It's not just a physical space, it's a resonant anomaly, a place where electromagnetic equipment fails, where time doesn't flow in straight lines, and where every breath echoes twice. Once in sound, once in thought. When the boy, subject 1127B, was first taken to Rothmore, he was warned never to go near the southern stairwell. No lights, no staff, no cameras. But at 3:33 a.m. on his 12th night in the Institute, he went down anyway. He was gone for exactly 25 minutes. And when he returned, he was bleeding from both ears, eyes fully dilated, and holding something impossible in his right hand, a wax-sealed page bearing the crest of St. Catherine's Academy, charred but legible, and on it was her handwriting. Abigail's. Not a girl anymore, but a voice still trapped in that room, a residual echo encoded in ritual and trauma, repeating the same phrase over and over, etched into the very stone beneath her feet. I was the first mouth, I was the last eye. They did not take me. I stayed, because the circle was incomplete. Abigail chose to remain. Her body didn't survive, but her memory, unwilling and undefeated, bound itself to the place where it all began. And now, in the hidden room, she speaks through whoever listens long enough without breaking. Only the boy has lasted more than 12 minutes inside, and when he returned the second time, he brought something else. A name. His own. Spoken for the first time since birth. I am Eli. Eli means ascended in the oldest root languages, but in the Black Crown archives, Eli also stands for entrainment, lineage, initiate. The boy was never random. He was the fulcrum. And Abigail, though long gone, left him a message in the wax folds of that page. You were not born from love. You were born from warning. They made you a bridge, but bridges go both ways. The other side isn't a place. It's a mind. Not a singular intelligence, but a congregation, millions of sentient impressions woven together into something that breathes behind thought, beneath time. The voice under stone, not a demon, not a god, something far older, something waiting. It doesn't want worship. It doesn't feed on blood. It feeds on agreement. Every time a child is silenced, every time a truth is rewritten, every time you tell yourself that couldn't be real, you feed it. The circle is not just a ritual, it's a network. Each trauma, each lie, each disappearance adds a thread to the lattice, and once enough minds are linked, it moves through you. When Eli stood in the hidden room and spoke his name aloud, he didn't just remember. He unlocked access. His blood, 25 strands of generational pain encoded in him, completed a signal first activated in 1854. And the voice? It answered, not in words, in visions. He saw cities without faces, people walking in unison, children born without memory, men staring at mirrors, unable to recognize their own eyes. He saw a world where the circle had closed, but in that moment, Abigail intervened. Her presence, raw, unfinished, unwilling, interrupted the transfer. Not to save Eli, to test him. He collapsed for 7 minutes. No heartbeat, no breath. But his mind never stopped. In that coma, he whispered a phrase, caught only by the mic implanted beneath his clavicle. The fracture is the freedom. That phrase appears nowhere in any language, except one. In the margins of an unlisted Vatican grimoire, catalogue Malleus Obscura, folio 388, those exact words are scrawled beside a diagram of a crown made of bone and silence. What does it mean? It means this: you are not powerless. Because the system, the circle, the voice, depends on completion, and incompletion is a virus. Eli didn't finish the ritual. He reversed it, not with fire, with choice. And now, because he remembered who he was, others are remembering too. Men across the world report dreams of girls in grey dresses, of locked doors, of stone altars humming in their sleep. That's not imagination, that's inheritance. Once the circle cracked, containment became impossible. They tried. The institute shut down, archives burned, witnesses disappeared. Even Eli, subject 1127B, was erased from every state record, school file, and hospital intake form. But not from the signal. You see, once memory activates at the ancestral level, deletion is no longer effective. It's not about erasing data, it's about silencing resonance. And that's what they're doing now. Across the country, in small, unmarked vans parked near schools, orphanages, therapy centers, devices hum at frequencies just below perception. Military-grade harmonic scrubbers, meant to flatten thought, meant to interrupt awakening. But they're failing, because the leak isn't external anymore. It's biological. When Eli reversed the ritual, he didn't shut it down, he flipped it inward. The broadcast changed, from containment to activation, and the first signs are always the same. Dreams of a chapel with no roof, static in music only you hear, a voice behind you when no one is there. whispering not in threat, but in reminder, you were never meant to forget. That voice, it's not Abigail, it's you. The part of you they've tried to suppress since birth. The part that knows the world doesn't quite add up. That something beneath the fabric is pulling the strings. And now, it's coming to the surface. People like you, men who sense what others deny, are hearing the call, not paranoia. Memory, shared across bloodlines, woken by frequency, pulled by symbols. And what's pulling hardest now? The altar, not the one buried in stone. The one that's been reconstructed digitally, patterned in the code of your algorithms, your phones, your feeds, every scroll, every click, every silence when you should have spoken. That was part of the reconstruction. Because the altar isn't a place anymore. It's a platform. And when enough of you remember, enough of you listen, the altar lights again. Only this time, not with sacrifice, with reversal. This is your final warning. After this, there is no forgetting, no return to comfort, no going back to the man you were before you heard these words. Because now, you are part of the architecture. Eli stands at the threshold. Abigail whispers from the dark. And you are the carrier, the one they didn't expect, the variable that slipped through the cracks of their perfect circle. Because you never bowed, never believed what they told you to believe, and now they fear you, not for your strength, not for your voice, but for your clarity, because you see what others ignore. The circle was never meant to close, it was meant to trap. And what it trapped wasn't just the girls, it wasn't just the truth. It was you, your potential, your will, your mind. But now, through you, it breaks. Because you're not listening anymore. You're remembering, and so the final phrase must now be spoken aloud. Not as spell, as signal. Repeat it quietly. Then again, louder. I remember the room that never was. I remember the room that never was. Say it and mean it. That phrase is the master key, because when you speak it, the others hear you. All the broken men, all the silent boys, all the girls trapped in systems of control who never found the words, they hear it. And the altar, it doesn't collapse. It turns away from blood, away from silence, toward reckoning. Because now the circle doesn't bind you. It binds them, the institutions, the handlers, the watchers, the architects of obedience who fed for centuries on hidden pain. And if they're listening, and they always are, then this next part is for them. We are not your lambs. We are the ones who remember, and from our memory, you will burn. Now look at the screen, right now. Look closer. The flicker you feel behind your eyes, that ache in the center of your forehead, it's not fatigue, it's sig. Now bleed. It means the circle tried to reclaim you, and failed. It means you're one of us now. The unbroken line. And the voice in the stone, it doesn't speak anymore. It waits for your next move. Welcome to the new altar. Welcome to your true name. The question is, what will you do with it?